Welcome to Prime Life. We call it Retirement 2.0. Leave each episode with tips and new ideas to help you navigate retirement in our new age. It's your time. Make it count.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical, investment, or financial advice. We do not sponsor or endorse any of the individuals, companies, products, or services featured on this podcast. Any statements or opinions expressed are of the individual who makes them. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Prime Life Podcast. I'm Mary Crean, and I'm here joined today with a very special co-host, Josef Katz. Josef, how are you today?
Mary, I am a little tired from late night feedings of grandchildren, but I am doing great. Thanks for asking.
Well, I'm super excited to hear that because I know you have twin grandbabies.
I said children, so yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I figured I'd be more efficient than the average grandparent and have my child have two at once.
Why not? I think that's more fun. That's exciting. Very excited. Congratulations again.
Yes.
Very notable. So let's kick it off with our guest today.
Will do. Thanks, Mary. Excited to welcome Melissa O'Hara, who is an expert facilitator and top talent coach who helps high achievers design lives and careers that align with their unique strengths. She's the creator of Horizon Life Design, a practical, energizing framework that helps people get unstuck, find clarity, and make bold, intentional choices for what's next. Welcome to the show, Melissa. I know I'm excited to hear a little bit about what you're doing. So why don't you tell us, our listeners, a little bit more about what you do, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Joseph and Mary. It's really great to be with you today. You know, when I think about where I am now, it probably helps to go back a little bit in terms of how I got here. By way of background, I've spent over 30 years in a corporate environment. 20 of those were, I call it in the business. I use that with air quotes. So that was running operations and in finance, the traditional business functions in financial services in the Hartford area. And then my kids were in middle school and I wanted to do something a little bit different. Like, what would I really get out of bed on Monday to do? And so I actually made an in company career change from finance to human resources. And there, I think one of the things that was an advantage is because I had spent so much time in the business, I understood the language. But there, what I got to do was become a talent coach. I worked with executives. I designed and delivered offsites. And for the first time in my life, I was in my 40s at the time, I was like, this is what I was supposed to do. Like, this is what I was meant to be. And it was really exciting to have that opportunity to feel like, okay, I am on the right path, playing to what I call my unique gifts and talents. When you fast forward a little bit more, I spent a decade in that role working with executives and doing work that I really loved, right? So I started out with a great job at a great company, getting paid well with colleagues I adore. So why would I mess that up? Well, I had the opportunity while I was at my company to do something called design thinking, which is a very creative problem solving approach. And it's often called human centered design. And to me, there's nothing more human than what do you want to be when you grow up? And so, what I started to do was explore this approach, which is design thinking, to deliberately design the life that I want to lead. And so, what's really amazing is what was on a piece of paper 6 years ago is the life that I'm leading today. And so, what I wound up doing was quitting my well paying job to start my own company. But because it was done, and we'll talk a little bit about the framework today, with a focus, with deliberateness, with intentionality, it was an amazing step. And there's not one day that I regret the choice that I made.
Well, I love that story. That's pretty amazing. So you must be courageous too. And that's a lot that you shared. I love the design thinking element, human centered. I think we can all use a dose of that. So I would like you to go into that at some point in our conversation.
Sure.
But I'm highly intrigued. What did you enjoy most about the work that you did at the company versus what you're doing now specifically? Because that sounded a lot, like there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of the things, and it's actually one of the themes and one of the tools, I'll kind of start with that, is this concept of energy tracking, Mary. And so, one of the things that I did, even when I was in the corporate environment, is I started being very thoughtful about what were the things that were adding energy and what were the things that were draining energy for me. In fact, one of the things we'll be able to provide to the listeners in the show notes is actually an energy tracking tool. And so, uh, when I got and understood, I'll give you an example. I was in finance, right? One of the things I really enjoyed doing was having even difficult conversations, coaching my employees, talking about how to really elevate them and have them perform at a higher level. One of the things I didn't like doing was listening to earnings calls and doing financial reports. Well, that was a big aha. If I'm in finance, wouldn't I want those things to be on the energy giving as opposed to the energy draining? And so as I became much more tuned into the things that were adding or draining energy from me, that was where I could go into and move forward on the things that I liked to do and that I was good at. And one of the other themes is also excluding the noise, because people in my life, well intended, would say, well, human resources, not as well regarded in a financial services company as HR. HR and finance are definitely different caliber of quality of job. So if I'd listened to people, I should have stayed on the finance track, the more legitimate of jobs, or at least that's the messaging that people had given to me. But this was paying attention to me and my inner knowing about what was bringing me energy and joy and happiness, and leaning into that, which opened up whole new possibilities for me in my career.
As you were describing that, I think about numbers of not many people who I know who have changed careers. They went to school for 4 or 5 years for a very specific track, and then they realized they hated it, or is this, to use your language, draining them. A lot of our listeners are sort of exploring what's next for them, right? And so I think we've talked about getting unstuck in a couple of our shows over the, was it almost 2 years now, Mary? Right? Uh, Intentional. I think that was an interesting word. Like, some people intentionally retire, some people unintentionally retire, some people intentionally go to work, and some people unintentionally go. So maybe you could talk a little bit about like how people make these choices from your paradigm of the way I watched your video, which I know will include the show notes as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So let me just walk through high level what the five elements of this life design framework is. And I think one of the things is having a framework, right? So if you're unintentional, you're just kind of like, I call it almost like a mouse on a wheel. You're just going from thing to thing. You kind of fell into it. You're not even sure why you're there. And so having a framework or a structure that allows you to do some reflecting. So that's the first start of the process. How do I reflect on what's important to me? And what's important to me for this season in my life. So, my own personal journey, I knew what 20 something Melissa liked to do before I was married and had kids and the career and all of that. But I wasn't really sure what 50 something Melissa liked to do anymore. And so that was a thoughtful process to say, what do I like to do? Where do I get energy and joy? What are the things that are maybe working well in my life? And perhaps some things that aren't working so well that I really need to make some modifications or deliberate changes in order. So, for example, for me personally, it was around health, right? I wanted to actually be at a healthier state. And so I needed to say, I have to focus on that. And by doing some reflecting time, and one of the things we give people is lots of exercises because different people learn or apply in different ways. And so when you reflect on that, you have a clearer idea about where you're going to go forward. In fact, I use the analogy of, imagine we were on the East Coast and we were getting in a boat to sail over to Ireland. Well, if we're off by just a few degrees, we could wind up in Africa, right? So that intentionality about knowing what's your true north for the season of your life, that reflection part is really an important element. So that's item one. The second one is to identify your kind of point of view, to declare your guardrails. What are the things that are important or unimportant to you? And one of the things, Joseph, that connects to that is a whole exercise about reframing. So I'll give you an example. I had one client and she was an attorney and she grew up learning that money was the root of all evils. That was like an assumption that she had in her life. So there was a lot of friction or tension between her making money as an attorney and what she had grown up with kind of messages from her. And so her reframe was that as I make more money, it allows me to be more philanthropic and make choices about where I give my money. That unlocked all new things for her about how she could be intentional about where she put her money moving forward. So reflect, then you identify, then you imagine. This is where you start to imagine multiple possibilities of your life moving forward. And for a lot of people, they don't know how to dream anymore, right? It's kind of been beat out of them over time. Is like, oh, well, that can't happen. For me, who the heck was I to walk out of my well paying job without one client? Like, that's not possible. And so while we help people imagine in that step, in the next step, what we let them do is explore or design experiments to try it before they jump in. Because that's one of the biggest, I'd say, blockers for people is, well, maybe I really do want to be an artist or I want to go out and explore, photographer, whatever it is, but I'm not sure or certain or I'm fearful about it. So the experimentation mindset in the fourth element around exploring is you get to break things in really small pieces and try it. So I got to try on entrepreneur as well as a lot of other things before I decided to move forward. And then the last element is choose or about making choices. And this is where people become emboldened because instead of feeling like life is being done to you, you start to get into the driver's seat of your own life. And so for that next element, those people who maybe by choice or not by choice have found themselves on retirement, this allows you to make the choices of how do you want to spend your days? What do you want them to look like? Who do you want to hang out with? And really make choices so you feel excited about the life that you're living. You are literally designing your life.
Just want to, before Mary takes over, I want a quick follow up. The reframing is pretty powerful concept, which I think many of us don't realize. We tell ourselves stories all day long, and that story becomes like fact in our head. We've talked about the money thing on the show a bunch as well, which is, money, like you said, root of all evil, control. It's definitely a deeper topic, but the reframing concept, I think, applies to lots of different things: your self-worth, your value, your capabilities, and so on and so on. So with that, I'll hand it back to Mary.
Thanks, Joseph. My question is, you gave an example, Melissa, that you had well-meaning individuals say to you, like, HR isn't as important as finance. How do individuals block out or stay true to themselves with all of the well-meaning family members, colleagues, relatives, you name it? Everyone has an opinion on what you should do next.
And we'll get that answer after a brief word from our commercial sponsors.
NASA is always working harder to be your carrier of choice. We offer insurance products that can help you meet your retirement goals, such as protecting your savings, securing lifetime income, or paying for healthcare costs. We're dedicated to providing best-in-class service and are keeping things simple, and we'll have your back. We have around 400,000 policyholders and contract holders and have been doing this for a long time, 170 years, but we remain humble enough to always try to improve. For more information, visit nfg.com. Nassau insurance products are issued by Nassau Life and Annuity Company of Hartford, Connecticut, Nassau Life Insurance Company, East Greenbush, New York, or Nassau Life Insurance Company of Kansas, Overland Park, Kansas. Subsidiaries of Nassau Financial Group. Products are not available in all areas. Policyholder counts are for all Nassau companies as of September 30th, 2022, and are subject to change.
Yep. So I'll actually unpack one tiny word that you said. What should you do? So what I say is should is could with shame. And so whenever you should do this, I always say stop shooting all over yourself. Like as soon as it comes from you should do this, it's probably coming from someone else out of duty or obligation. It's not coming from yourself. So part of
Got
it
it.
is this inner work. But the one of the concepts around design thinking is this concept of radical collaboration. So you do invite other people. This is not a solitary journey, but you have people generate ideas or people who know you and admire a gift and ask for that type of thing. But collaborators matter. So, for example, for me, in early stages, my parents, and I'm lucky they're both still alive, were not the right collaborators for me. To have conversations about me possibly leaving this corporate job to start a company, they were not the right people to even have those conversations. And so I think it's about selecting who are the right companions for you in different parts of your journey. If you need to come up with new and innovative ideas, there are certain people in your life, I'm sure, friends or loved ones, who would serve that role really well, and other ones who would shut you right down. And so it's just being thoughtful about who are you inviting into different parts of the process that are going to be your cheerleaders, are going to encourage you and support you, as opposed to ones that are going to shut you down.
Now, I love that radical collaboration. I've heard that before. My good friend Ellen Last, who works for Slalom, often talks about that. She does design thinking with companies, and she has brought that into the mix at times with me on a personal level, which I love. So I think that's a really great point that you make. I'm sure that you have to step back and really ask yourself that question, because we all know that some individuals have a positive mindset and some individuals don't. And it's not necessarily that they want ill for you, but they're also thinking, oh, that person may change. How's that going to feel for me? Right. Because most of us are thinking, what's in it for me? I hate to say that, but it's kind of true. So I love that you shared that. So thank you.
And a lot of
Mary.
it is fear driven, right? It's those people in your world, they're
Mhm.
afraid for you. And so this is what you said, courage, like that's a big step in the process. It's not having the fear, but it's being able to move forward despite it.
For the record, Mary, if your cup is half full or half empty, you can always get a bigger cup too, right? Just think bigger, think outside of the cup. Um, Melissa,
I love that.
you talked about clarity and focus. There's some very successful people who have become successful, maybe even despite the clarity and focus. But why do people struggle with that? What can people do to avoid or refocus if that's what they need at a certain point in their life? Again, it could be work. It could be just, I've stopped working and now I don't know what to do with myself. Well, how do I get on track? How do I
Right,
find my next adventure?
right. Well, the good and the bad, I think for me, and for many people, is you can do anything, almost anything, right? So I'm not going to become a center for the New York Knicks, but there are many, many, many things that I can do. And so with that becomes a sense of overwhelm, Joseph, right? Which is like, I don't know what I should do. So one of the other design thinking principles is this concept called bias to action. And so instead of sitting around and thinking like, well, I don't know, would I like to do this? Would I like to do volunteer work or not? And I'll give you an example. So volunteer work is a great example. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go volunteer at a homeless shelter and I'm going to serve lunches. And I did that, right? This was about being brutally honest with myself. I didn't enjoy that experience. So talk about energy. My energy was drained by it. So I really giving back to the community is an important value for me. And I do like to do volunteer work. So here's where it did come in. I worked with United Way, and they've got a group called the Emerging Leaders, and they were doing case competitions about how to support the local community around food insecurity. I was coaching those teams so that they could bring amazing results to the local community. That's where my energy and volunteerism started to intersect. And that is an important clue to say, well, now I can volunteer and do more work like that, as opposed to doing work that I should do, right? So again, I should be the kind of person who goes to serve at a soup kitchen. but really saying if you can find your unique gifts and talents, find a place in the world where people need you, that's where you're going to do it all day, every day and feel excited. Now, whether that's for pay or whether that's vocational or community service, that's where you feel really excited about leaning into what you're doing.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Melissa, what you don't know about me is I was one of the individuals that kicked off Emerging Leaders at United Way.
Well, look at that. Look at how our
Yeah.
world intersect, Mary.
Yeah. I was one of the executives that sponsored that. And so hearing you say that was like music to my ears.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to hear that. So thank you for that unknowingly. Let's talk a little bit about some of the steps that you take with individuals. If I'm an individual that is feeling stuck, or maybe I've retired, or maybe I'm just in a corporate job where I'm saying to myself, I think I really need to do something. I have 20 more years per se that I want to be working in anything. But again, I'm a little bit ambivalent. Like, what are the first few baby steps that you suggest to individuals so they're not, again, they don't have that fear or
Yeah.
worried about making that
Right.
change?
Right. So, one of the things that I do is an exercise called gifts and talents. And it's taking a step back and saying, okay, what are my superpowers? What am I really good at? Unapologetically saying, no, I'm good at this stuff. Now, I find a lot of people get stuck at that step. So then it goes to radical collaboration. Ask your friends, family, colleagues, people who know you well, not just random people, right? And what's really amazing is they start to see the same word choice, the same descriptions around the things. And those are important clues for them to move forward. Then you start to explore and say, okay, what are some ways that I might, and I always say I might. So you don't have to, but you might. It's very possibility oriented. What are some ways I might use those gifts and talents in the world? So I'll give you another example for myself. One of the things around facilitation and doing coaching was become adjunct faculty at a university, college, local community college, whatever it might be. Well, that would be a great idea, help people, train them, give them wisdom. That would be an amazing thing for me. Here's the important part about experimentation. What I tell people is what is the least amount of effort that you can spend to answer the question? So the question really was, would I like to be adjunct faculty? And it truly is a question mark. I did not know the answer to that. Now, old Melissa would have gone to a local college, started teaching a class. Imagine how much time, work, effort, and energy that would take for me to answer the question at the end, do I like it or not? Quite a bit. So instead, what I did was I reached out to people. There's a colleague of mine who does HR at teaching at a local university. And I had a conversation with her. And this was the one question I asked that answered it for me. And I said, if on day one you went to your students and you said, everybody here can get an A, how many of your students would take the A without having to go to class ever again? And she said, probably about 80%. And I said, awesome, amazing. So I knew the answer for me was now no to this because I want to work with people that are more excited about learning than they are about getting a grade. And the thing about the experimentation mindset that's really important is you're going from question marks to exclamation points. And the exclamation point can be a heck yes or a heck no, and equally valid. Because a lot of people feel like, oh, I didn't like that. I failed in some way because it was a no. With experimentation, a no is just as exciting as a yes. So for me to say, I didn't have to worry, back to your question, Joseph, about all the things you could do, I could check off the adjunct faculty and I could focus my time and energy in other places to really explore what is next for me. And what's really cool is you can be doing these experiments in working it into things you're already doing. And that's where it's really powerful. It's not like I have to do it in addition. It's okay, if I'm already doing volunteer work, what questions do I have about it? And how can I use the experiences I'm already doing to answer those questions?
I love that example and the way you address the should I become a, sorry, not should, do I want to become a
Right.
adjunct professor? you sort of opened up a door to like the problems with higher education in today's world. But we'll save that for a different show, maybe a different podcast altogether. Too many people just in school to get grades and check the boxes. But back to our show. Let's talk a little bit about like identifying that moment, right? So you were working in the financial vertical of your company. You went to the HR. What was the sign? What triggered that thought to say, "Hey, and what could people look for? Like, I'm just not doing what I love doing." Like, I think a lot
Yeah.
of people don't love what they do, and they just do it because it pays the bills and so on and so on. Nothing wrong with that, just not as fulfilling.
Well, and again, it's around choice, right? So I work with plenty of people who, if the choice is right now being there and providing for my family from a financial standpoint, the difference is that's a choice, Joseph. What I find is there's a lot of people who are just kind of like, well, I have to do this. I don't really want to, but I've got to muscle it through and I've got to do this for a paycheck and I don't really like it and I'm grinding every day. That is not a designed life. That is an exhausting life. And so if you're doing that for the next 5, 10, or 20 years, it's almost like you're pausing on living your life until you can get rid of this lousy job and start really doing what you want. That's not what life design is. So I've worked with plenty of people who are inside an organization and perhaps have that sense of malaise, just this meh. It's like, okay, I'll go and I'll get the paycheck, but I'm not really happy about it. And for those people, what we do is explore what's missing. What are the things that are missing right now from you getting out of bed on Monday and saying, I can't wait to go to work. And there's this one woman, and she's more mid career, stayed at the same organization, wound up moving to a different department, and her whole life changed, not just in work, but her how she related to her family, her kids outside of work. Because when she changed, everything about her life changed. And so whether it's leaving an organization, some of my clients do decide to leave, but many of them decide to stay and take agency or ownership around their experience by designing it and saying, I can do better and I'm not going to just tolerate okay for the next 5, 10, 20 years.
I feel more
Yeah,
energized
I
just
really
listening
like
to
what
you.
you said about I can do. Yeah, no, I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Joseph. I really liked what you said about I can do better. I can envision that coming up in individuals that really decide they're going to make a change. I want to do better. I can do better. In some ways, I don't know if this is the right term, but I deserve to do better because I do want to live. Like you said something just a few moments ago about, slugging it out, or just staying, and doing what you consider maybe, again, you feel obligated to do. And you stop living, I think, when that happens. So I think that you bringing that up is really poignant for our listeners. But as we kind of, close a little bit on our conversation, what are some tips or some insights that you would want people who are listening to this podcast with you, Melissa, to take away so they can apply immediately, maybe one or two things, and then maybe a few things in a little bit more of a distant future?
Sure. The first one is just the ease and the simplicity of energy tracking. And it's not just what is going on, but it's subtext underneath. So, for example, one of my person one-on-ones with employees, some of them brought energy and some of them drained energy. So, curiosity is another design thinking mindset, just not judging, but being incredibly curious about what are the things that are bringing me energy and why, and what's the difference between the things that drain my energy. And when you can start to eliminate some of those things that drain your energy, it's going to start to change things for you dramatically. And so the important part at the beginning especially is to write it down. So there's a kinesthetic way of when you're writing things down, it's imprinting it. I prefer actually handwriting as opposed to typing, but whatever you want to do is whatever's your jam. Writing it down, then you go back to it and you start to see themes, you start to identify things. Usually what I tell people is over the course of a couple of weeks, a month. So if you were to dedicate maybe once a day for the next 30 days to write down what's adding or draining your energy. I will guarantee at the end of it, you're going to have some insights that are going to allow you to make some course corrections around the findings that you have. So I think that's one of the biggest, simplest takeaways for the listeners today.
And journaling is a great way to start your day too, or end your day.
Absolutely.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Maybe that's what you're supposed to do. And to be quite frank, I think Mary and I would talk to you for another hour, but we all have to go on to other things today. You could do anything in your career. You've done a bunch of different things. You said, 30-year career at a corporation. You're now doing this. Why do you choose to do this versus anything else that you could imagine?
Yeah. So when I started my own company, you have KPIs or metrics. Came up from corporate. That's what you have. And so my organization has 3 measures of success. The first one is revenue because it is a business, but it's the other 2 that drive me every day, Joseph. The second one is days of play. So I took 85 days off last year, and I also find the intersection of play and work. So for example, I just spoke at a yoga retreat in Costa Rica for a week, right? So now I can find the intersection of those. So days of play. And then the third one, and that's really why I made this change, is to positively impact the lives of others. And I actually track that on a weekly basis. I go through and I have people send me thank you notes or, this has changed my life, having the chance to work with you. And not that I wasn't making an impact in corporate, but not in the same way. Not in the way that I can actually make a difference, get people excited and energized about the life that they're living, and give them the tools that they can have to move forward.
Awesome. I think my invitation to that yoga retreat must have gotten lost in the mail.
It must have, yeah.
I was going to say the same thing. That sounds amazing. I keep hearing how beautiful Costa Rica is. I've never been there, but I know many folks who have been there or want to go there. So it sounds like definitely the place to be. I really appreciate your perspective. It's inspiring. I know you've inspired me. It sounds like you've inspired Joseph. Joseph, do you have any final thoughts before we ask Melissa what's the best way to get a hold of her?
Well, I've been taking some notes and things I'm going to personally follow up on some books I've read that she triggered some thoughts on, some deeper dive into the process that she outlined, intentionality, focus. I think those are, everyone could benefit from that regardless of where they are or what they do. So
yeah. I love that. And for me, I keep thinking about the little P, not the big P of purpose. We did have a guest on and he talked about Jordan Grummett. He talked about the big P and the little P, and purpose sometimes is part of that conversation that we have with ourselves. Melissa, it's really been wonderful having you on today. If individuals want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? We will put everything else in the show notes.
Yeah. So the best way is just to email me, which is melissa@OharaSolutionsGroup, all one word, .com. And I will say, I really do mean it. So I know when I'm listening to things like this and people put an email out there, I might feel awkward or uncomfortable about reaching out. I don't know who they are. I genuinely mean it. If there's something that sparked your interest in the conversation today, really just email me, reach out. I would love to start a conversation.
No, that's great. Joseph, always great to spend time with you and see you. And I hope you can catch up on your rest from the grandbaby feeding in the middle of the night or whenever you're doing it. And Melissa, so wonderful to have you on our podcast. I know that the individuals that you circulate with are among my favorite people because you are a referred guest. And we love that our guests refer other guests. And that's why we have such amazing individuals. For our listeners, please follow us, reply to us, give us your feedback, the things that you love and the things that maybe you don't love, so we can continue improving the Prime Life podcast. Everyone have a great day, and thank you for listening.
Remember to subscribe to the Prime Life podcast anywhere you find podcasts. You can find all of our episodes, contact information, and more on our website, primelifepodcast.com. Stay connected with us. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.